Two of the most famous liberal voices in America just looked into the camera and said the words no Democrat wanted to hear. Not a Republican strategist, not a Fox News host. Van Jones and Bill Maher, two men who built entire careers defending the Democratic Party, are now standing in front of millions of viewers admitting the party they love may already be lost. And the reason has nothing to do with Donald Trump. For years, the biggest threat to the Democratic Party was assumed to come from the outside, from Republicans, from Trump rallies, from conservative media. But something changed in the summer of 2026. The threat that Van Jones and Bill Maher are now warning about is coming from inside their own house, and it is growing faster than anyone in the party establishment expected. It started quietly in New York. A wave of primary elections swept through the city in June, and when the votes were finally counted, the results shocked even seasoned political analysts. Candidates backed by the Democratic Socialists of America did not just win a few scattered races. They dominated. 12 out of 13 DSA-endorsed candidates walked away victorious, several by comfortable double-digit margins. Two of those wins were especially seismic, landing in actual congressional districts rather than local city council seats. Claire Valdez took New York's 7th congressional district by defeating a well-funded, union-backed progressive candidate by more than 20 points. Meanwhile, in the 13th district, a community organizer named Darializa Avila Chevalier stunned the political world by ousting a sitting Democratic incumbent, the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, a man who had held his seat through years of tough elections. This was not supposed to happen. Democratic leadership viewed this district as untouchable, safely controlled, and completely off the socialist radar. They were wrong. If you think this story is just about like and subscribe, wait. This is only the beginning of what is quickly becoming the most serious identity crisis inside the Democratic Party in a generation. What makes this moment different from past waves of progressive energy is the sheer scale of it. This was not one surprising underdog story. Analysts tracking the primary results across the country now count more than 35 DSA-backed candidates who have already secured wins heading into the November midterms. These victories are not confined to deep blue cities anymore. The movement is expanding into Colorado, Missouri, Michigan, and Wisconsin, states where Democratic strategists desperately need moderate, broadly appealing candidates to win back competitive seats. Membership numbers tell their own story. The Democratic Socialists of America has grown from roughly 24,000 members back in 2017 to well over 120,000 members today. That is not a fringe group anymore. That is an organized, well-funded, highly mobilized political machine operating directly inside the Democratic coalition, and it is no longer satisfied with city council seats. It wants Congress, it wants state legislatures, and increasingly it wants control of the party's national direction. This is exactly the moment where Van Jones decided he could no longer stay silent. Jones is not some outside critic. He served on President Clinton's National Security Council. He worked in the State Department under Madeleine Albright. He has spent decades as one of the most recognizable progressive voices on television, a lifelong Democrat who has defended the party through scandal after scandal. But in a public statement that stunned his own followers, Jones said he was tired of being told that to qualify as a real progressive, he now has to swear allegiance to ideas he considers dangerous. Jones made clear he still believes in criminal justice reform, in a Green New Deal, in expanding healthcare access, in free education. These are not new positions for him. What he rejects is the newer, harder-edged version of the movement, the wing he described as regressive rather than progressive. For a man who has spent his entire adult life inside Democratic politics, to publicly break from his own party's rising faction is not a small moment. It is a signal flare. And then there is Bill Maher, a man who has spent nearly 3 decades mocking the American right on his HBO show, suddenly finding himself agreeing with people he has spent his career ridiculing. Just weeks before all of this, Maher confidently told his podcast audience that Democrats simply could not blow the midterms, that the political winds were blowing so strongly in their favor that even the party's own dysfunction could not stop them. He used the phrase, "Even they can't blow it." Fast forward, only a matter of weeks, and Maher completely reversed course. Speaking to ABC News anchor Jonathan Karl on This Week, Maher did not hold back. He called Democrats cowardly twice back-to-back for emphasis. He said their party is being taken over piece by piece, radical by radical, and that every single day brings a new headline about someone even further to the extreme fringe gaining influence inside the coalition he used to defend without hesitation. But the line that truly set social media on fire was about his own vote. Maher openly admitted that his support in the 2028 presidential race is now, in his own words, in play. He specifically said it cannot be Trump running again, but he also made clear he is no longer automatically loyal to whoever the Democrats put forward either. When pressed directly by Carl about whether he could actually vote for Vice President J.D. Vance, Maher did not dodge the question. He said yes. Think about what that actually means for a moment. Bill Maher, the man who spent years as one of the most reliably anti-conservative voices in American media, just told a national television audience he would consider voting for a Republican vice president over wherever his own party is heading. That is not a small crack in the wall. That is a warning shot fired directly at Democratic leadership in Washington. Maher went even further, referencing the DSA's own official platform documents to justify his concerns. He said he had personally read their language, their own words describing government takeover of key industries, and argued that regardless of what label people prefer, socialism or communism, the underlying policy goals sound remarkably similar to systems America has spent generations opposing. He said flatly that he refuses to be told he is not seeing what he is clearly seeing. If two lifelong liberal icons are saying this on national television, you have to ask yourself what happens next. Stick around, because the political fallout from this is only getting bigger, and we still have to talk about what happened when Maher sat down face-to-face with Vance himself. That confrontation happened just weeks earlier when Vice President J.D. Vance appeared as a guest on Maher's own HBO show. It was a moment few people expected. Maher pushed Vance hard on immigration enforcement, accusing ICE of being far too aggressive under the current administration. Vance did not back down. He pushed right back, and by most accounts, including Maher's own visible reaction on camera, the exchange did not go the way Maher had hoped. What stood out most from that interview, though, was not the policy debate. It was Maher's own admission about who actually shows up to talk to him anymore. He pointed out that it was Vance, a sitting Republican vice president, who was willing to sit across from him and answer difficult questions on live television. Meanwhile, he specifically called out prominent Democrats by name, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, former Vice President Kamala Harris, and New York City's own socialist mayor Zohran Mamdani, for refusing to appear on his show at all. Speaking of Mamdani, his rise cannot be separated from any of this story. His mayoral campaign became the launching pad for the entire DSA movement's current momentum. Mamdani personally loaned his star power and his massive volunteer network to multiple congressional candidates during the June primaries, appearing in ads that promised to abolish ICE entirely and end what they described as corporate greed. Every single candidate he backed went on to win their primary race that month. Political analysts now describe this as a genuine identity crisis unfolding in real time. Pete Aguilar, the House Democratic Caucus chairman, tried to downplay the significance publicly, telling reporters that people simply have a right to vote and that he does not read too much into individual primary results. But privately, according to multiple reports, party strategists are far more alarmed, especially those focused on the competitive swing districts that Democrats actually need to win back the House majority in November. One former Colorado congressional candidate summed up the mood bluntly, saying that as an American, he does not like the direction of the DSA, and as a Democrat, he does not like it either. That kind of blunt internal criticism from within the party's own ranks is becoming increasingly common, and it is exactly the kind of division that Republican strategists are watching with quiet satisfaction. And that brings us to the deeper question hanging over this entire story. Is this actually a moment of expanding energy for the Democratic Party, proof that a new generation of voters wants bolder, more aggressive policy solutions? Or is this the exact kind of internal fracture that historically dooms a political coalition right before an election that should have been an easy win? Because remember, the political conditions heading into the 2026 midterms were supposed to heavily favor Democrats. Historical trends around midterm elections during a Republican presidency, combined with approval ratings that gave Democrats plenty of room to maneuver, should have made this a relatively straightforward cycle. Bill Maher himself said as much only months earlier. The math was supposed to work in their favor almost automatically. Instead, according to Maher, the New York primary results changed everything. He specifically pointed to what he called really crazy candidates as the reason Democrats might now find a way to lose an election that should have been unlosable. His exact words were memorable. He asked how they were going to blow it and answered his own question by admitting he did not know exactly how, but that they seemed well on their way toward doing exactly that. This is where the story becomes bigger than just two celebrity commentators venting frustration on television. Van Jones and Bill Maher represent two very different audiences within the broader progressive media ecosystem. Jones speaks to the policy-focused, establishment-aligned wing of the party, the people who worked inside actual White House administrations. Maher speaks to a broader, more casual audience who tune in every Friday night expecting sharp political commentary wrapped in comedy. When both of these very different voices arrive at the same conclusion within days of each other, that is not a coincidence anymore. That is a genuine signal that something inside the Democratic coalition has shifted in a way that even its most loyal defenders can no longer ignore or explain away. Republican strategists, unsurprisingly, have not missed this moment. A spokesperson for the House GOP campaign arm publicly described the New York primary night as the moment the Democratic establishment officially surrendered to the socialist wing of their own party. Whether or not that description is fair, the framing itself is now spreading rapidly across conservative media, and Democrats have offered no unified response to counter it. Meanwhile, campaign finance records are adding fuel to the fire. Federal Election Commission filings show that a majority of one DSA aligned. Candidates' campaign funding actually came from out-of-state donors, much of it funneled through super political action committees rather than grassroots local support. Critics argue this undercuts the movement's own branding as an authentic working-class politics. So where does this leave the Democratic Party heading into November? On one side, you have an energized, well-organized, rapidly growing socialist wing that has proven it can win real elections, not just symbolic ones. On the other side, you have longtime party loyalists like Van Jones and cultural commentators like Bill Maher openly warning that this direction could cost Democrats the very moderate, persuadable voters they need most in competitive swing districts. If you are enjoying this breakdown of what is happening inside American politics right now, do not forget to subscribe, because this story is nowhere near finished. The 2026 midterms are still months away, and if primary season already looks this chaotic, November could bring changes to the Democratic Party that nobody currently expects. What happens next likely depends on how Democratic leadership chooses to respond. Do they lean into this new energy, embracing candidates like Chevalier and Valdez as the future of the party? Or do they attempt to contain it, protecting more moderate incumbents in swing districts while risking the enthusiasm of a rapidly expanding progressive base? Right now, based on every available signal, party leadership appears genuinely unsure which path to choose. To understand how deep this rift actually runs, it helps to look beyond New York City and into Albany, where the same pattern is playing out at the state level. Socialist-backed candidates are on track to pick up at least 6 additional seats in the state legislature, according to independent election trackers. That surge happened, despite an extraordinary wave of outside spending specifically designed to stop them. Super political action committees poured close to $10 million into primary races for state assembly and Senate seats this year alone, nearly 5 times what was spent during the same period back in 2024. That kind of spending surge tells its own story. It means establishment aligned. Democrats recognized the threat early and tried to smother it with money. In many races, that strategy actually worked. Several DSA-aligned challengers lost their primary bids after facing this wall of super PAC-funded opposition. But in enough races, the spending simply was not enough to stop the momentum, and that is exactly what has party strategists so nervous heading into the fall. There's also a generational angle running underneath all of this that rarely gets enough attention. Voter turnout data from the June primaries showed the DSA movement drawing disproportionate strength from younger voters, along with growing support among Black and Latino communities in urban districts. This is not simply a story about far-left activists winning over already progressive strongholds. It is a story about a movement actively expanding its coalition into demographic groups that Democratic strategists consider absolutely essential for winning national elections in the years ahead. Inside the party's own ranks, opinions remain sharply divided over what this expansion actually means. Some longtime Democratic operatives argue this new energy is exactly what the party needs. After years of lagging enthusiasm among young voters who feel increasingly disconnected from establishment politics, they point to record-breaking volunteer numbers, with tens of thousands of new organizers mobilized specifically around these socialist-backed campaigns, as proof that this movement can genuinely expand turnout rather than simply redirect it. Others inside the party see a very different picture, one where short-term primary enthusiasm comes at the cost of long-term general election viability. Their argument is straightforward. Winning a safely blue congressional district in New York City is one thing. Winning back a competitive swing seat in a place like suburban Pennsylvania or rural Wisconsin, where moderate voters ultimately decide the outcome, requires an entirely different message and an entirely different kind of candidate. This exact tension is why Van Jones's comments carry so much weight within Democratic circles. He is not a Republican operative looking to score political points. He built his career navigating both wings of this coalition, working inside Democratic administrations, while remaining deeply connected to grassroots progressive movements. Now, when someone with that specific background says the party is being pulled toward ideas he considers regressive rather than progressive, it forces a conversation that many Democratic leaders would clearly prefer to avoid having in public. The same logic applies to Bill Maher. Even though he operates in a completely different lane, Maher has spent decades building credibility specifically as a sharp critic of the Republican Party and the American right more broadly. That credibility is precisely why his recent comments landed with such force. When a lifelong critic of conservatives suddenly says his vote is genuinely up for grabs, it sends a far louder message than the exact same statement coming from someone who already leans conservative. There's also the matter of timing, which political analysts say cannot be overlooked here. These comments from both men came within days of each other, right in the middle of a summer that was already shaping up to be politically volatile. Immigration enforcement controversies, ongoing debates over foreign policy, and economic anxiety among working-class voters were already dominating headlines before this particular story broke. Adding a very public Democratic identity crisis into that mix only intensifies the uncertainty heading into the fall campaign season. Republican operatives have wasted no time weaving these comments into their broader midterm messaging strategy. Campaign ads are already being tested in several competitive districts that specifically reference Maher's comments about the Democratic Party being taken over by radicals. Whether or not voters in those districts actually respond to that messaging remains an open question, but the fact that this narrative is spreading so quickly through conservative media ecosystems is itself significant. What is clear is that Van Jones and Bill Maher, two men who built their entire public identities around defending democratic politics, are no longer willing to stay quiet about what they see happening inside their own party. Whether that turns out to be an early warning that saves Democrats from a disastrous November or simply the first one. Public admission of a collapse already well underway will become clear soon enough. For now, two of the party's most trusted messengers have already delivered their verdict. And it is not the one Democratic leadership wanted the country to hear.